The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Intro to Google My Maps. This is part one of a series. I'm Bart Mihailovich, Organizing Manager for the U.S. for Waterkeeper Alliance. I want to thank everyone for their time today and for joining today's webinar. I'm really excited to get started here. I have a couple bit of housekeeping and updates to go over first. As a reminder, all of our webinars here at Waterkeeper Alliance are recorded, and today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording of which will be made available shortly after we're completed here, and it will be available on the Waterkeeper Alliance online resource library. For everybody who registered for today's webinar, I will send out an email probably later today or tomorrow with the link to the recording, as well as contact information for our presenter and the PowerPoint or the slides in the deck from today's presentation. Again, this is part one of a series of trainings going through Google My Maps and other Google tools and how they relate to Google My Maps. Part two will be Wednesday at the same time here, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern, Wednesday, March 13th, so a few weeks from today. I also want to remind folks, and our presenter Ron Hall will talk about this, or not remind, but update everybody that in conclusion of today's webinar or sometime thereafter, we're in the process of working out a forum, a trainers or a learners forum for people interested in this topic, a Google group, naturally, that we can use to continue this conversation and continue the conversation with our trainer, Ron Hall. We haven't figured out all of that yet, but please be on the lookout for an email to the list of registrants for this webinar as we discuss a forum for us to continue this conversation and to ask questions and help one another through these topics. So this will probably be completed sometime between now and the second webinar, and so the conversation can continue. And for those of you in the Pacific region, our trainer today, Ron Hall, will be at the Pacific Summit later at the end of March to pick up from these webinars and build upon them and so much more. Real quick before I get into a couple quick questions via the poll functionality, there will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end of the webinar. If you have questions, of course, you can always type those out in the questions box, and I encourage you to do so as you think of them. So at the end of the webinar, when we can answer, when Ron can answer questions, I can read those off. So please feel free to type the questions in the question box. If you'd like to ask your question yourself, there is the virtual hand raising tool on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can click that, and I will see that you have raised your hand, and you can ask questions that way as well. So I do have two poll questions I'd like to get into. We'll do them really quick, and then I'll introduce Ron. But before I do that, I'm really excited for this opportunity. The vision here is to do a two-part series where we intro what's possible today, and Ron will go through some examples. And then in a couple weeks when we follow up, we'll have an opportunity to build upon that with going a little bit deeper into some of the scenarios that Ron shows. One of the main reasons why we wanted to have this webinar and do these trainings is we've heard through some of the most recent natural disasters that many of our waterkeepers and affiliates have dealt with, that having the ability to quickly map out what's happening, upload photos and videos, and create a visual story to the scenario was really important. And so hopefully through today's and the next webinar, you'll learn how to do that. And also being prepared for disaster by mapping critical infrastructure in your watersheds is another goal that we're trying to accomplish with this. And we think that the tools gained here will help us do that. So I would like everyone just to quickly look at their GoToWebinar control panel. I do have a couple quick polling questions that I'd like to do, and we'll launch these really fast. The first one is, what is your current usage level with Google My Maps? And I'm going to let people have about 30 seconds before I close this poll. Well, still gathering some responses. So what is your current usage level with Google My Maps? And we will close the poll now. We got about 50% who have never used it, 42% have made a few maps, and 8% say they use it all the time. Last poll question we're going to launch here. Would you be interested in a Google group where you could ask questions of our trainer and other users and share resources? This, of course, is what I did mention just earlier. we would like to set up this group and have a forum for folks to continue the conversation and continue to share resources and learn from one another. So we've got just about 76% of attendees have voted. Okay, we will close this poll now. So clearly, overwhelmingly, yes, people would like to see this group set up. So that's good to hear. Okay, thanks for entertaining that, and we're going to get started here. So I am really happy to introduce today's webinar trainer, a good old friend of mine from when I was Spokane Riverkeeper. Worked with him on a lot of projects. He's a bright individual, and I look forward to this webinar and future webinars with our trainer today, Mr. Ron Hall. Go ahead, Ron, take it away.
Okay. Before we get started, I just want to remind you what Bart said about this presentation, that it's a Google Docs slideshow, and Bart will make the link publicly available. The translation on that is, don't worry about taking notes. As Bart mentioned, I've worked with some individual river keepers and the Waterkeeper Alliance for a number of years, helping them use various Google mapping tools to make residents aware of the challenges facing their local watersheds, as well as getting them better acquainted with where these rivers and lakes and coastal waterways are located and the resources and opportunities they contain. That's how I met Bart when he was our local river keeper here in Spokane. Last year, Bart approached me about developing a webinar series, a user forum, and some online learning resources to acquaint water keepers with these Google tools and empower you to do this on your own. This webinar series is our initial effort, like Bart said, and we welcome any feedback you can give us to improve this effort. We're both confident that using Google My Maps to create and share custom web maps about your local venue, its issues, and the work you're doing there will expedite your work, increase the impact of your messaging, and allow you to leverage your waterkeeper efforts across the web and social media. The tool is free. I feel, and I'm 65 years old, I feel it's intuitive. All you need to get started is a Google Gmail account. Okay, what are we hoping to accomplish with these two webinar events? Webinar 1 will cover the first few items on this list on the right. I'll take a look at some examples of maps that have been created and used by waterkeepers effectively, provide a general overview of what My Maps can do, and give you a basic orientation to the My Maps user interface by creating a simple map live. We hope to take some questions and answers and engender more. I basically hope to get you more excited about My Maps and engaged in creating maps with the tool, and then more curious about all the different capabilities of the tool. The second webinar will move down into the lower portion of this agenda, and it will be a deeper dive into My Maps capabilities, covering tips and tricks, answering user questions from the webinar itself or maybe from the forum, and talking about how to integrate My Maps with other Google tools or web resources and separate software that you might be using to expedite your work. Okay, with regards to some of the sample maps, what I'm hoping to do is cover 3 today. The one in the upper court, and this is a still, is the Friends of the Caw, Riverkeeper down in Kansas, has created a My Map for their local river access and embedded it in the website. The second one is going to be one I used and created over in the Spokane Riverkeeper area, having to do with the Spokane River and all the issues associated with it, but I put it together as an example of using GIS data that's publicly available. The third one is a My Map that was created through the National Alliance, or I guess in conjunction with the Wabash Riverkeeper, and it has to do with a crisis map as a result of a spill in a pipeline over there. So now I'm jumping out of the presentation, and hopefully this will pick up. We are looking at an embedded My Map at the Friends of the Caw website. According to the calculations I have, and one of the cool things about My Maps is that it tracks the usage of these individual maps. There's been almost 180,000 uses of this particular map. Because it's embedded in their website, they can expand upon the drop-down menu that comes with My Maps that has a legend and information upon it. They are able to add additional information within the web page. And one of the other things that they've done is create another series of maps that are particular to each individual access point. Some of these maps, when you click on the information bubbles, there's actually links in there that take you to these other maps that are here. You can see from clicking on the map that they've got the ability to have various pieces of information, text-based information of different types that can be structured in different ways, images, and links are embedded in this one. If users want to interact with the map in a different interface, they can click over here to make it go larger, view in larger thing, and I'll do that in a minute. If they want to share at the website, there's options to share on various social media platforms, and that's where you get your, and if somebody else wanted to embed it within their website and just actually expand upon the user base for the map, they can do that. So if once you click on the larger map, the map itself, or the capabilities, how fast my maps loads, this is a broader user interface that you can actually use on a mobile device or on your workstation. So the second map I want to take a look at is the Spokane Aquifer map. This has had about 3,000 views. This is where you'll see on the tracking or the number of views that are on it. What we've got here is the use of government data to tell a story, acquaint people about things that are going on around the Spokane River and the issues associated with it. What we've got, and you can turn these on and off, is the aquifer, which is displayed. The river drainage, we can turn on related. Drainage systems that dump into the Spokane River. We can give people, excuse me, an idea of the entire Columbia drainage system. We've got things in here that are like an aquifer tour, where these are similar to the access map done by the CAW people. You can click on items and they'll bring up different things about features within the watershed, dams, users. There's a list of them here that's displayed each time. You can see that this expands depending on how you check it. Water purveyors, all the water purveyors. And like I said, every one of these things, these pieces of information came from somebody else. The GIS departments, they're either made publicly available online or I made a request, but it's publicly available data. With any of these layers, and you can see how they're all styled different. There's ways of different stylings you can use. One of the options you have when you're viewing it in this mode is actually opening up the data table associated with it. So you can actually see some of the GIS data, and the number of columns vary depending on what's in it and what's in it. And each column varies a little bit depending on the data you're importing. This can be edited, but it's just another tool within the My Maps interface. It's very GIS-y. These can be used, and we liked using these for having community discussions. We've got things like the aquifer thickness, and you can see how that's structured and with color coding. Because we've got different players in our area, we actually have a couple of local reservations on here too. All based on user-provided information in case somebody asks the question, where'd you get that? Another thing we can do on the fly is change over to a satellite image for more specific usage of this map. To actually drill down and see where you're at. And there's about 9 different base maps you can use on this. So, and I should also point out the same way, this can be shared, copied, or printed, these maps. And I'll talk a little bit about this when we get over to the user interface where you find this stuff. The last map that I want to show today is one that Bart shared with me. It's a map that was generated in response to some kind of oil spill up on the Wabash River. I think it's over in Illinois. It was created by waterkeepers.org. At this point, it's got about 2,000 views. The most of the detail I have on it here. All this could be expanded. But one of the cool things about it with My Maps is not only can you put in images and text, but you can put in videos. So these were ones that were taken by the Wabash Water Keeper Network. And why I show it is not only the power of a video, but that you also get an audio channel with this. So if you wanted to, you could actually add your own talking to it to just get more stickiness, more engagement in the content. Another thing that you're able to do with My Maps is actually access it over Google Maps, but I'll cover that a little bit later, where you get some increased tools. All right, so let's talk a bit more in specifics after we've seen some examples. And I just did a cursory thing because we're trying to keep this to an hour today about some of the capabilities and showing off some of the maps. But let's talk a little bit about what My Maps is and what it can do. Google My Maps is one of the several online tools for making and creating custom interactive web maps. The cool thing about it, from my perspective, is that it integrates with other Google Cloud documents and Google mapping tools like Google Earth, as well as GIS software and various data formats that are standard for place-based data. Above all, as I've said before, I feel it's intuitive to use, and because I'm Scottish, it's free. While My Maps is free, you need to set up a free Gmail or Google account to use it. And while you can do this with any Gmail account you might already have, one of my tips for a waterkeeper and for your waterkeeper work would be I would suggest using or creating a distinct one just for that, or tagging it if you have a waterkeeper Google account to that. It keeps all your Google work in one little pyramid. After you've created a map on My Maps, you can use it in a wide variety of ways on the desktop and mobile devices, essentially anywhere where you can use or access Google Maps. My Maps has many options for creating custom map. You can use the toolbar and search capabilities to create one from scratch. Those are up in this area up in here, if you can see my mouse. If you can't see it, let Bart know on the feedback and I'll change it over to a Google Docs laser pointer. You can use the search capabilities, and one thing I'll tell you about all Google tools is they generally have some type of search, and you can use those search capabilities to find places and add them to the map and create it from scratch. You can also import data. There's a little import sign over here. This is a still image. We'll talk about this later. And you have several other options for a base map, as I've talked about before. So let's get a bit more specific. The toolbar gives you the ability to add points anywhere and save them to your final map. Any point or map feature you create, whether it's a point, line, or an area, can be deleted, edited, or reorganized in the map content that appears in the sidebar or the legend on the one side of the map. Like all Google mapping tools, you have search capabilities. Those search results gives the place names, addresses, contact telephone numbers, and associated website possibly, and even a review for a wide variety of geographic information. My Maps gives you the additional option of adding your search results as well as the point to your map. You can use the feature creation tools to add lines and calculate distances, and are given the option of adding these to your maps as well. The same capability is there for shapes and areas. Just like Google Maps, you can get directions and also use them to create map features and layers. And that's one of the cool ways of sometimes of creating line information. We'll talk about that probably in webinar 2. In My Maps, you can create interactive info bubbles with text, links, images, and videos. You have several choices for starting a base map and are given the option for satellite view in the published map. You can also view and edit the data tables behind the map data, as we saw in the case of the Spokane Aqua map. There are almost 400 default point icons to style from, and you can also create and use your own custom ones. In addition, you can vary the line color, the line width, and the transparency of line and shape features. You can organize your data in a numeric sequence or by groupings in a particular category that you have in a data table that you import with the data. You can use a Google photo album to create a My Map. Google Photo Albums are an organizing tool that is in Google Photos, which comes along with your Google account. Just another point of contact between all the Google tools. Google has evolved its mapping tools to accommodate the mobile-based web world we live in. You can create My Maps on a mobile device. You can also view them on a mobile device. You can access and view your maps in Google Maps. Just make sure you're logged into your Google account and open up your contributions in the legend. This will allow you to access the Street View and geolocation capabilities of Google Maps. So I'm going to jump over to Google Maps now. This might take a little bit of time. So what you're looking at is my individual Google Maps account, and you would have this if you just logged in on Google Maps on your Google account when you're logged in. Over in the left-hand side, there is a menu. When you click on it, it's 3 bars. It's very mobile-oriented, and you can do this on your mobile phone. You go down to where it says Your Places. That opens up several selections that you might have in Google Maps, but I'm drawing your attention to the one on the far right that says Maps. If we click Maps, you'll see a listing of the various My Maps that I've accessed, some of which I own, some of which have been shared with me, and some of which I discovered and was interested in. As an example, if we click on the Marathon pipeline spill, it brings it up, but now we're in Google Maps, and if you draw down to the lower and look closely, lower portion of your screen, you'll see the little icon that's there for Street View, and you'll also see the geolocate button. And because I'm on my workstation, we're not going to see a little, if I press that, it shipped me back up here to Spokane, but if you were in the area, you could use that to pinpoint where you were on this map. Let's say you were a local resident. Another thing that ends up happening as you come in is if you use the Street View, and click on Street View, double click on it, you can see where Street View is in the area of the spill, and actually go over there and click on the Street View. We have one right alongside the river, and see what this looks like. Here's what the river looks like on a good day with no spill. The reason I point all this out is one of the things I also am doing with organization is teaching them how to post their own Street View. So that's how you view it on Google Maps. You can also you can export your My Maps data and load it to Google Earth for viewing. And that's one of the most robust areas you can view this data in. All kinds of tools there. As we mentioned before, Google hosts these maps for free and provides the code to embed them in a website and share on various social media platforms. My Maps allows you to collaborate with other users to create a map. You can also crowdsource to create a map from public input using a Google form. You can make maps that are available to the public or keep them private and just share them between a few people via the link. You can import and display data from your own work or from publicly available resources like state and federal GIS data. You can create files in Google Earth and use them in My Maps. After you've created your map, you can export the data from it for use in other software tools. And if you're old-fashioned, you can even print it. You can find samples at the My Maps website. Just select the Explore tab, which is on the right side. So let's try creating a simple map. I'm going to work live with My Maps, but if you use the link to the Google slide presentation later that Bart's going to send you, there are additional slides, which I'm not going to show today, that come after this getting started that can act as a tutorial. So let's go over to My Maps. So when My Maps opens, you can see that there's various different tabs. There's ones that everybody or all maps that you've had access to. You can filter it by owned, by not owned, shared, or recent. This is the Explore tab over here. So now we're going to create a new map. And we're looking at the default opening start page of My Maps. Right underneath the search bar for creating a new map. What you'll see is the map creation tools, the legend over here that populates as you work your way through building a map. It has a place where you can actually title the map, and you just click on it. And we can add a description to that. What I tell people with that description, it's just like any Google tool. You might want to put a lot of things in there, and you can put links within that and mainly text, but this is also what makes it searchable. It's information that's in here. If you save that, you can see that things have changed up here. If you ever want to get back in and edit it, you just click on it again, and you're back in. There's 3 little dots I want to draw your attention to alongside that. Those give you different options having to do with the map for copying the map, creating a new one if you want to jump out of this one, opening a map to get you back into your My Maps interface, get rid of it, move it to trash, set to default view. We'll talk a little bit about this. And this is where you get embedded on your website. Or if you want to export it, you can export it. And we'll talk about this next time for usage in Kml, which is keyhole markup language used in Google Earth and Google Maps and a lot of other GIS software. And finally, you can print the map. We have an untitled layer here. If we wanted to put a name on it, we can click on it or double click on it, or turn on the layer options, rename this layer. Save it. And if we screw up, we can either rename it, delete it, or, as we said before, open the data table associated with it. If we want to start populating that map, we can actually use some of these tools here to add a marker. You go out, you click on the tool, you reach out onto the map, you created a marker, and what you can actually do then is you can see that's appeared within that layer. Point 1, if we want to change it, we can do that. We can add description down here. We can add pictures. We can paste a link in there. If we save it, it appears over here. Anytime we want to access it again for editing, we just click on it. All right. So that's points. There's another piece over here, another tool called Draw a Line. Okay. With that, it'll give several different options for types of line. We'll cover a little bit more about this next time. We're going to just draw a line or shape, the top one. And so just by clicking on the map, you can see that I've got a line going. When I double click, that ends the line and opens up the interactive box for it. And you can see that it appears over there, and we've got the same type of editing features. Okay, so if I save that, we can do that. Now, if I want to use that same tool to create a shape, because it's draw a line, even though it appears on that, that's where I get to the shape tool, where it says add a line or shape. I simply draw on top of it and then back on top of the original starting point. And now I've got the shape. And if I save it, now you can see I can access certain tools for styling it by clicking on the little paint bucket. You can see in the shape tool, not only can I change the color, and this is true for the lines, I can change the border width. And one of the cool things is I can change the transparency, making it more or less transparent so you can see what's underneath it. That's one of the things I used in the Spokane Aqua tour. If we want to add a layer, there's an add a layer tool up here. Now we've got another layer, and this is where you can import. I'll use this as an example where you can import. When you click the import, you can either upload from your computer. You've got a Google Drive that's associated with your Google Drive, with your Google account that you can access information from. This is where the photo albums comes in. In addition, you can drag and drop in here, or from the types of files that you can upload from your computer are a CSV file. For those of you that are familiar with that, it's kind of a text file. XLSS, that's if you've got Google spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet information. KML, a wide variety of formats get that. And GPX, if you're using a GPS unit, you can put those files in here. You can also select a file from your device. This gets back to using your mobile phone. So we'll cover more about all the particulars about this in detail in the next webinar. I'm just trying to get you comfortable with the web face or the user interface. Down here, below here is where the base map options are. And this is where we can change to various types of base maps that are satellite, and atlas, if you're looking more for terrain, which is helpful if you're pulling in on certain areas, to give folks an idea of what the terrain looks like in their area. And I apologize, I'm not sure how well it's showing up on yours, but with the base map also, no matter, you've got these different styling ones that you can use. And keep in mind, whatever style you use, you'll always have the option to use satellite view. Your share options are where you access whether you're going to keep it public or private. And as once again, just in case I did that too quick, the share options are over here on the menu. I'm assuming you can see my mouse. It's about the third layer down. The share thing is right in the middle. There's that little icon next to it with a plus. And in there, that's where you can change it to make it public or private, anyone with a link, or specific people. You can change the settings down here to make give people different editing capabilities. They can edit or just view. And then also you can email people and it will create a message to them saying, hey, Bart, I've shared your map with you. You've been given editing capabilities. What do you think of this? Et cetera, et cetera. Here's your share links that go out for these various different. You want to share it from Google Plus, which is actually going away, but Facebook, Twitter, okay, and your Gmail. There's a preview button, but before you preview, sometimes what you want to do is just experiment with setting the default view. What people are going to see when they first open up. So if you get a certain view you like, you go back up to these three dots up here, or next to the map title, and you drop down to set default view, about the fifth one down. And that sets the default view. You get an information box that says your current view has been saved. And then when you hit a preview, it'll open up a new window. And that gives you an idea of what this map will look like and where it opens up. At this time, I want to start taking a few questions if anybody's got any, but I want to let you know that you can feel free to reach out to me by email. And I'm genuine about that. It's not like I'm trying to engender any kind of communication or a Twitter feed. And when we get the user forum up and running, I'll be monitoring as well. And I hope that's a great resource. I've used user forums before. It allows people to interact with each other and also me to get in or Bart to get in and say, hey, here's some stuff. Another tip I want to share before I start taking questions is that there are tremendous online resources for learning more about mind maps. We're hoping to create some under the Waterkeeper umbrella and in their library. But in addition to the general mind maps help, which Google keeps, you can just Google any question about mind maps and you'll find videos, blogs, and websites devoted to expanding your knowledge on how to use it. And Bart, I'm not sure exactly where we stand in terms of where we're at with your assignment on the website, but or webinar, but I'm open for questions now.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ron. And I'll remind people, if you do have questions, you can use the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can type your questions there. If you'd rather ask your question directly to Ron right now, you can use the hand raised feature on the control panel. We can take questions that way. Right now I'm seeing not a question, but a comment. Someone is thanking you very much for the presentation. And I'm sure others are typing questions as we speak. And again, Ron did mention his, or show his contact info there. It's still on the screen. I will, at the conclusion of today's webinar, send out the recording of this webinar, the presentation itself, so you can go back through what was presented and Ron's contact information. And we will work on setting up a user forum of some sort and get information out to everybody there. So if there's interest to continue this conversation, not only ask Ron questions, ask others questions as well, and kind of build a community around this topic. We're very much interested in piloting this out to see what it's thinking, what we can do with it.
Well, and in terms of just the other thing, Bart, is if you can see the question panel better than my 65-year-old eyes, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll read the questions as they come in.
One thing for sure that we're interested, I don't like to tell people how they should use something. We're structuring this for water keepers. I try and let them, and that's part of the reason I put my feedback information up there is I welcome questions about, hey, could we use it for this? We're thinking about using it for that, because that allows me to get even more involved and do deeper dives. And with some, I'm part of the Google Trainers Network. We do an awful lot of work with nonprofits. And I think I've been down a number of times for meetings with nonprofits that Google sponsors worldwide, and the Google engineers are very excited about dealing with nonprofits because they find them to be their most innovative users. In addition to that, they tend to be some of the most creative users. And then the engineers, while they're tasked with doing things that make money for Google, they love it when they hear that their stuff has been used to save the elephants or save the apes or create clean water or any of that. Google's one of their mission statements is to do no evil and to do good.
Great. Well, we do have one question here. Can you make layers visible or invisible at different resolutions?
Let's see what I'm talking. So they're within the sample map. Okay. I think I know what there might be two answers to this question. On the most very basic layer information visibility, there is a checkbox. Okay. So if I go over, we go up to where we've actually done something. I made this map at a large scale. Simply checking the layer on or off makes it invisible or visible. Depending on how, like in the map that we have for the Spokane Aquifer, I choose to just have a couple things clicked on when I set the default view. That allows most of the other things that are there to appear in the legend. So people can say, oh, if I want to click on this, I can also see this information. And then I also should point out that you want to look for scroll bars if you're using these maps, if you don't see everything, and experiment. Just like any kind of mobile device, one of the things that you can do with how these layers are structured is depending on the order they're in and what kind of content you've got on them. Like in this particular case, we've got the Aquifer tour. That shows up overall any layer that I might have. And you can also take and change the transparencies. One of the things that you also want to be aware of with that is the clicking on it, okay? Now, the second part of that question that I think is a little bit more of a webinar 2 thing, but I'll tackle it today if it's just what they're thinking about, is in the deep dive into using interactive maps and Google Maps tools, there's a thing called regionation, okay? And what that means is as you fly in from one closer to the map, certain things start appearing. If we were to have this data set that had 1,500 points on it in the state of Washington at this level, it would just show up as one point or several points. And as you fly in, they start to expand. That's called regionation. That's a feature of a lot of the old Google Maps and in Google Earth. So that is kind of built into the software itself, but not necessarily at the level you might be used to from a programming level in Google Earth. So the answer is depending on what I was trying to cover there is yes, there's ways to make certain things visible and non-visible and overlap. It's not quite, we don't have quite the same capabilities in Google Earth to specify it. And what I haven't done, and this is part of the reason I'm glad for the question, is when you import into Google Earth, into Google My Maps, the import option is a Kml file. And what I'm still learning about is what comes along with those Kml files. So now that you've asked me the question, one of the things I'm going to be interested in is whether or not I can import a Kml file that has been regionated, say in Google Earth, and will that capability come along with it into my maps? So I can ask that on one of my forms. So that's a very good question. Thanks for asking it.
Here's another question. This is great because this question came up on a previous Arcgis webinar, so now we'll tackle it here on the Google My Maps webinar. And the question is, how easy is it to share maps, data, designs between Google My Maps and Arcgis or other GIS software?
Very, the big four-letter word on that one. What I recommend to people is if they haven't got it and it's still available, Google Earth Pro is now free, all right? With Google Earth Pro, what I and Bart and I were going back and forth on how to describe it. For years, I taught online in the GIS program at a local university. And what they asked me to do, and it was an Esri-based program, they asked me to provide the Google element to it. So on one hand, the very simple way to take any Esri shapefile, if you're familiar, we're talking about a shapefile, which for people who are non-Esri users, a shapefile is a zip file of all kinds of information, but it mainly is made to display in Esri. Well, with Google Earth Pro, and we'll talk about this next webinar, is you can actually import a wide variety of different data formats, one of which is a shapefile. And you can bring it in directly. It shows up in Google Earth Pro, and then you can save it as a KML or what they call a KMZ file, which is actually just a zip KML file. So on the one hand, you can very easily take any shapefile you've got and bring it in, okay, for the most part. And there might be a few esoteric things we'll talk about next time as far as what system you're looking at it in or what data set, what's the data set up. The other thing, if you are an accomplished Esri user or want to learn more about it, it's also possible to export KML files from Esri. And I encourage you to do this, especially if you're using large data sets, because within the back and forth wrenching between web maps and Esri that goes on incessantly, one of the challenges of the web is loading data that's viewable by a wide variety of demographic users of the web, especially mobile users. And one of the things that I ended up doing as an example was those things that I showed on the Spokane Riverkeeper piece that was about the aquifer were taken off large data sets. So I could cherry pick them using an Esri tool, and for Esri users like Clip or Filter or things like that, so that you reduce the size of the data set within the Esri tool and choose how you want to export it. Without getting too complicated, and we could talk more about this in the user forum that we're developing and also next week, there is a distinct difference in the way Esri composes the KML for export out of its file system versus what Google Earth composes when you bring a shapefile in and look at it in Google Earth. A very interesting, if you're, I hope I'm not making anybody's eyes glaze over when I talk about this, a very interesting thing to do is actually use a text editor and open up a KML file that's been generated in Esri alongside of it. And there's one that Google recommends called JEdit that you can put two files side by side and look at the differences in the KML. Because sometimes you're looking for certain capabilities and it's not there because of the way you chose to export it out of Esri. The other thing I recommend is if you're really looking to use things in Google Maps, take them over to Google Earth first and then start wrenching on them. So we're going to be talking about this in more detail, hopefully next webinar. I apologize for going on about it, but you can see I get excited about this stuff. So the quick answer is there is a complete back and forth capability between the two tools.
Great, and this is a good question as well. If I have a Google spreadsheet that is constantly being updated, can I create a map that shows the data in real time as it is updated, or do I have to manually update the map every time I update the data?
That's another one of those yes buts we'll be covering next time, because Google Spreadsheets has the ability to get behind, to create maps on its own. There's some add-on tools that do that. There's also some things within Google Maps about what types, how you create the geographic information in there, whether you're using GPS coordinates, address coordinates, or just simple like city of Spokane or whatever. So there's the answer is you should be able to do it within a spreadsheet. And part of the reason I'm just update the spreadsheet and it goes out, and that might be how you're importing the import document over here in My Maps, how you're choosing to import and what's going on with that. We'll talk about this more. Part of the reason I'm heavily interested in it, for anybody that's a power user of Google tools, one of the most prolific ones for geographic and data visualization stuff is fusion tables, and that's going to go away within the coming year. So I've been doing a lot of work with this myself, trying to figure out how I can change over from visualizing large data sets to smaller ones that you use in My Maps. So I'll get more into this next time, but I believe the answer to that is yes, if I understand it correctly, that you should be able to work with a spreadsheet and have it update from there. Second thing, I think I mentioned this, that we'll be covering next time, or we can talk about in the forums, you can actually use Google Forms to update. So to the extent that some of this information might be coming in from, you've got, let's say it's data you want to assemble. We had talked about this with Bart as part of the legal process, creating with water keepers, creating a Google form that allowed users that were using the form to assemble evidence for a waterkeeper-based initiative. You've seen a spill, so you plug into things in the form, and then they populate the sheet, and they populate the map. So that way, you're actually using a Google form, which is a Google spreadsheet. So I know that can be done.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron. Another question. What kind of file am I going to obtain for my map? How can I get it as an image to include in a document? I think maybe how do I get the map to show up in a document is how that question is worded.
There's several ways you can do it. One, depending on if you're talking about just within a Google Doc, you can embed certain things. At this point in time, I'm not quite sure if you can embed an interactive map if you're used to using interactive Google Docs that have links like cloud-based documents. If you're talking a paper document, for sure, one of the things you can do is actually go into the preview mode, interact with it in the preview mode, and do a screen capture. That's one thing you can do. The other thing, as far as, well, how do I do a screen capture? That gets back to my one basic Google message, and that's why I love learning online, is that just Google, how do I do a screen capture with whatever device you're used to using or your software. That'll help you to do it. I know I've done it so much on a Mac that you can do command and 3 or 4, just do portions of it. What I encourage you to do if you're using screen capture, especially on a Mac, you can use Preview or other software to annotate it with arrows and things like that. The second way you can possibly do it would be with the 3 tabs, depending on how you want to do it. You can print the map. Okay. Another thing you can do, and this is where you start getting creative, you can download the KML and take it over into Google Earth and do screen captures in there. I believe there's print capability in that as well. So you're not just locked into using My Maps. If you understand where the KML files are, and when you get to KML, when you download the KML, this is the part where, depending on what you're doing with the KML file, if you get 2 options to keep a network link. Okay, if you're going to use the KML in some other type of software, and that would update it when the map is updated. And then if you're trying to get a KMZ, what a KMZ is actually a zip file. That'll include all the images and other stuff with it. You won't get that in a KML file.
Yep, that's good. I think this may be the last question, but if one other one comes in while you answer this one, if there's time, we'll take it. Otherwise, we'll follow up elsewhere. But this question comes in: have you ever used My Maps to create story maps?
Oh yeah, that is the reason they developed My Maps. And what it does is there's several different ways of creating a story. You can do it through photo albums and then edit within the photo album. I have a My Map up. I've got a map up of the Nez Perce National Historic Trail that's got close to 100,000 views on it. Okay, that's what I was going to show you. And it's basically the story, if you're not familiar with Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce tribe. And no, that has everything in it. But there's 110 different icons on here. These are custom icons that tell a story about that tell the Nez Perce Trail story, starting from all the way over at Lake Wallowa, all the way through to the final battleground. And the reason I did this was they had print brochures that they've been passing out for years, and this leveraged the content of those print brochures. But part of the reason I was excited about it was the print brochures was already vetted content by the tribes and the federal government. So the quick answer is yes, and I've done it, and you can see that those types of things if you go over to Explore My Maps. They got everything in there from Sherlock Holmes's London to the great stories, like story maps to go out with books that you're reading. So the answer is yes, you can use it for storytelling, and that's one of the most powerful reasons it was created.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. So we haven't had any other questions come in, and that's great because we're right at the end of the hour anyways. So I want to thank everybody for their time, for their great questions and attentiveness to this webinar. I will get this recording up on the Waterkeeper Resource Library soon. I will email everybody out when that is completed, and I'll have the PowerPoint slides and the contact information for Ron, and possibly an update soon on the follow-up forum where we will continue this conversation. Part 2 of this 2-part webinar series, again, it's on Wednesday, March 13th at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern. That is the standard time for our webinar series. So if you have not yet registered for that, it is a separate registration link. It's been being sent out in the Waterkeeper Weekly, as well as other emails as well from your regional organizer. So Ron, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I look forward to hearing from you again in part 2 in a couple weeks. And I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their day.